"He's completely irresponsible with money," my dad shouted in court. The judge glanced at the file and said, "He actually manages a $50 million fund." My dad froze as the courtroom exploded in reaction. Can you imagine the man who's supposed to be your father, standing across a courtroom, shouting at a judge that you're too irresponsible to handle money? It sounds like a bad movie, but that was my life, a decade-long nightmare culminating in a public battle against my own blood. And the most shocking part? He wasn't just wrong about me. He was about to learn how devastatingly wrong he truly was. My name's Tyler, I'm 29, and if you'd told me years ago that my dad and I would be tearing each other apart over finances in front of a judge, I would have laughed in disbelief. But that's the brutal truth about family. Sometimes, the deepest cuts come from the people you least expect. Growing up, there was always a clear favorite, and it wasn't me. My older brother, Matt, was the golden child. He got the new cars, the private lessons, the lavish trips abroad. He was the one my dad beamed about at dinner parties. Me? I was the quiet one, the dreamer who loved books and numbers, and apparently, that made me a profound disappointment. My dad never said it directly, not in so many words, but I felt it in the way he endlessly praised Matt and barely acknowledged my existence. When I'd try to talk about my passion, finance, investing, the world of numbers that genuinely fascinated me, he'd just wave me off with a dismissive chuckle. "Tyler," he'd say, "you're too soft for that world. You'll just get chewed up." By the time I hit my teens, I'd already learned not to expect fairness. Matt sailed into a good college with my dad's full financial backing. I had to fight for scholarships, take out loans, and work grueling part-time jobs just to afford my own education. But you know what? I didn't complain. I figured I'd prove myself on my own terms. That became my mantra. I wasn't going to beg for scraps of his approval. I would make my own way. College was incredibly tough, but I thrived. I devoured everything about finance. Late-night study groups, internships where I'd fetch coffee but soak up every spreadsheet I could get my hands on. By graduation, I'd landed a job at an investment firm that most of my peers would have killed for. I called my dad, excited, desperate for even a flicker of pride. His response? Flat. "That's nice," he'd said. "But you should really think about something more stable. Those firms chew up young people and spit them out." The bitterness started to really grow inside me then, a cold knot in my gut, but I buried it. I focused on work, poured myself into it. Slowly, meticulously, I built a reputation. I got promoted. I managed bigger and bigger accounts. My world began to expand, and eventually, I earned the chance to run a large investment fund. Today, that fund manages over $50 million. It's not just money, it's the culmination of trust, immense responsibility, and years of relentless effort. I'm not saying this to brag, but to highlight the cruel irony of what came next. Because even with everything I achieved, my father still saw me as completely incapable. Family gatherings became unbearable. My dad would toast Matt's new promotion, Matt's new car, Matt's new house, all while sneaking in little digs at me. "Don't blow all your money on silly things, Tyler," he'd quip. Or, "Maybe one day you'll catch up to your brother." I'd sit there, quietly reminding myself that his validation meant nothing, but God, it still stung. Things finally exploded after my grandfather passed away. He left behind a sizable estate, and there were complications with the will. To my absolute surprise, I had been given a significant role in the inheritance distribution. Grandfather, unlike my dad, had always believed in me. "You see things differently, Tyler," he used to tell me. "Don't let anyone convince you that's a weakness." My dad hated that. The moment the estate proceedings began, my father made it his personal mission to tear me down at every turn. He actually claimed I couldn't be trusted with handling finances. He spread rumors to relatives that I was reckless, that I'd squander everything. At first, I tried to ignore it. But then, official legal documents started arriving, formally challenging my ability to oversee the portion of the estate tied to me. That's when it hit me. He was taking this to court. The day of that first hearing is burned into my mind. Sitting there, watching him on the opposite side, arms crossed, a smirk playing on his lips like he'd finally won. He spoke with such certainty, painting me as some kind of irresponsible fool. "Your Honor," he declared, his voice booming, "Tyler has never been able to handle money properly. He lacks the discipline, the sense of responsibility. I love my son, but the truth is, he's just not capable." His words hit me like physical blows, even though I'd heard variations of them my entire life. But hearing them in a courtroom, officially recorded, was something else entirely. I clenched my fists under the table, desperate not to show how much it hurt. I wanted to scream, to list every late night, every impossible deal I'd closed, every sleepless week where I'd held entire portfolios together while others buckled. But I stayed quiet. My lawyer leaned over and whispered, "Just wait." The judge, a formidable woman, flipped through the files. My lawyer had submitted my entire professional background, my current position, the performance of the fund I managed. When she looked up, her expression unreadable, she spoke words that froze the entire room. "According to these records, Mr. Tyler Reynolds manages a $50 million fund. Is that correct?" The courtroom rippled with whispers. My dad blinked, visibly thrown off balance. He stumbled back slightly as if her words had physically struck him. For the first time in my life, I saw his confidence absolutely shatter. He opened his mouth, but nothing came out. I sat there, heart pounding, watching the cracks appear in the perfect image my father had built of me all these years. The judge's voice cut through the silence again. "That doesn't seem irresponsible to me. In fact, it suggests quite the opposite." The murmurs grew louder. My dad's lawyer nervously shuffled his papers. My brother Matt shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his smirk wiped clean. And me? I sat still, but inside, something profound shifted. For years, I had swallowed his insults, his dismissals, his constant comparisons. But in that moment, I realized the power dynamic was starting to change. And that's where things really began to unravel, because my dad wasn't about to let his carefully crafted version of reality collapse without a fight. The silence in that courtroom didn't last long. My dad had always been a master at talking his way out of uncomfortable moments, and I could practically see the gears turning in his head as he scrambled to recover from the judge's revelation. He cleared his throat, plastered on a smile that didn't reach his eyes, and said, "Well, Your Honor, managing numbers on paper is one thing. Real life is another. Tyler may look responsible on the surface, but I assure you, when it comes to family obligations, he has always failed." It was subtle, but he was shifting the ground beneath us. He wasn't just attacking my professional reputation anymore. He was aiming for something much more personal, my role within the family. The judge raised an eyebrow, but S.'d little. My father's lawyer picked up the cue immediately, emphasizing character over financial expertise. "Yes, Your Honor. Tyler may have impressive credentials," his lawyer said, his tone almost mocking, "but let's not forget this is not about managing clients or investments. This is about handling a family legacy. And we have grave concerns about his ability to honor that responsibility." I wanted to laugh at the sheer hypocrisy. Here was my father, the man who had once emptied out my college savings to pay for Matt's tuition shortfall, lecturing about family responsibility. But instead of laughing, I just sat there, swallowing the anger, because I knew we weren't anywhere near the end of this fight. After the hearing was postponed for further review, things at home took a sharp turn for the worse. My phone lit up constantly with calls from relatives. My aunt, who had always been a mediator, called me late one evening, her voice strained. "Tyler," she sighed, "your dad is saying you're trying to cut him out. He's telling people you're planning to sell the estate and pocket the money." I almost dropped the phone. "What? That's ridiculous. I haven't even, I know, she cut me off quickly, but people listen to him. You know how your dad is." And she was right. My dad had a twisted way of spinning stories that made people question their own memories. Before long, I noticed the subtle shift in family dynamics. Cousins who used to chat with me at gatherings now avoided eye contact. A few even unfriended me on social media. My brother Matt, of course, played along. He sent me a smug text one night, "Maybe you should just let Dad handle things. He knows what he's doing." I didn't reply, but that message burned in my chest for days. Matt had always reveled in being Dad's shadow, the chosen one, the one who could do no wrong. Now he was clearly enjoying watching me squirm. The next family dinner was when things really came to a head. I showed up out of obligation, naively thinking maybe I could smooth things over. Instead, I walked straight into an ambush. The moment I stepped through the door, the conversation fell silent. My mom gave me a tight, uncomfortable smile, but said nothing. My dad leaned back in his chair, arms folded, as if he'd been waiting for this exact moment. Well, he said casually, look who decided to show up. The big investor himself. Laughter rippled around the table, though I could tell it was forced. My brother smirked and muttered, careful. He might try to buy dinner with imaginary money. I froze, gripping the back of my chair. Imaginary money? What are you even talking about? My dad leaned forward, his eyes gleaming. Oh, come on, Tyler. Everyone knows these so-called funds are smoke and mirrors. Numbers on a screen. One bad week and poof, it's all gone. That's not stability. That's gambling with other people's money. And you want us to trust you with our inheritance. My chest tightened. The words weren't just meant to humiliate me, they were meant to undermine every ounce of credibility I had worked for. And worse, he was doing it in front of people I grew up with, people whose opinions I still cared about, no matter how much I tried not to. Dinner carried on with snide remarks slipped in every few minutes. Matt brought up my old car breaking down in college, turning it into a joke about how I couldn't even manage a used Honda, but now he wants to manage millions. My dad chuckled and added, exactly. History repeats itself. I sat there in silence, picking at my food, forcing myself not to explode. Inside, though, something was shifting. The anger that I had bottled up for years was starting to harden into something sharper. Not just frustration, but a cold, steely determination. Because as much as my dad thought he controlled the narrative, I knew something he didn't. I wasn't the same kid he used to mock. I had leverage now. Resources, connections, knowledge. And while he was busy painting me as the irresponsible one, I was already learning how to turn the tide in ways he wouldn't see coming. But that night, I kept my mouth shut. I let him have his little show, because deep down, I was starting to realize that letting him underestimate me might just be the key to everything. And sure enough, the next move he made only pushed me further toward that breaking point. I didn't think my dad could push me any further than he already had. I was wrong. Looking back, I should have seen the betrayal coming. My father wasn't satisfied with mocking me at dinners or spreading lies to relatives. He needed to control the narrative completely. And when words weren't enough, he decided to act. It started subtly. I got a call from the bank one Tuesday morning. The woman on the line sounded polite but confused. Mr. Reynolds, she said, we just wanted to confirm. Are you authorizing the request to transfer oversight of the family trust account to your father? I nearly dropped my phone. What request? She hesitated. We received documentation yesterday with signatures. One of them appears to be yours. My blood pressure spiked. That's impossible. I didn't sign anything. She lowered her voice. Then I suggest you review this quickly, because if we hadn't flagged a discrepancy with the paperwork, it might have already gone through. I drove straight to the bank. They handed me a copy of the paperwork, and my stomach dropped. There it was, a document supposedly signed by me, giving my father authority over part of the estate tied to my name. The signature wasn't mine. It was a forgery. I stared at the page, numb. My dad had actually forged my name. He had taken my identity, my own handwriting, and tried to use it against me. When I confronted him later that evening, he didn't even flinch. We were in his study, just the two of us, the smell of his cigar smoke filling the air. He leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers like he was in control of a chess game. You think you're ready for this responsibility, Tyler, he said coolly. You're not. You're playing with fire, and I won't let you burn this family down. Sometimes a man has to take matters into his own hands. My voice shook with rage. You forged my signature. You tried to steal what isn't yours. He tilted his head and smirked. Steal? No. Protect. You don't know what you're doing. You've always been reckless. I'm saving you from yourself. I slammed my hand on the desk, the papers rattling under my palm. You're not saving me. You're destroying me. Do you even hear yourself? He leaned forward, lowering his voice. One day you'll thank me. But until then, you'll play the role I tell you to play. It was like being hit with a wall of cold water. That wasn't just arrogance. That was pure, unadulterated control. He didn't just want the money. He wanted me under his thumb forever. The son who couldn't stand without him. For days, I couldn't think straight. I'd lie awake at night, replaying his words, feeling like I had no ground beneath my feet. If he was willing to forge my name, what else would he do? Who else would he convince that I was incompetent or unstable? The fallout was immediate. Somehow, word spread among the family that I had panicked and tried to sign away my part of the estate, only to regret it afterward. At the next gathering, I walked in and felt the weight of everyone's eyes on me. Whispers followed me from room to room. My cousin pulled me aside and asked, "Are you okay? People are saying you had some kind of breakdown." A breakdown? That was the story. Now, my dad wasn't just attacking my responsibility. He was going after my sanity. And the worst part, people believed him. Even Matt got in on it. He cornered me in the hallway with that same smug grin. You know, Dad's right. Maybe it's for the best. You've got a lot on your plate with your little fund. Why not let him handle the serious stuff? I wanted to punch him. Instead, I just walked away, because deep down I knew that reacting in anger would only prove their point. But something shifted in me after that betrayal. The weight of all those years being ignored, mocked, dismissed, crystallized into something sharper. For the first time, I wasn't just angry. I was determined. My father had crossed a line he could never uncross. I wasn't going to let this stand. I couldn't. And yet, even as I resolved to fight back, I didn't realize just how far he was willing to go next. After discovering the forged documents, I thought the worst was behind me. I figured exposing them would be enough to stop my father in his tracks. Maybe even shame him into backing down. But instead, it felt like the ground kept shifting under me, pulling me deeper into a pit I couldn't climb out of. The whispers my father planted in the family spread like wildfire. Suddenly, I was unstable. I was the son who had snapped under pressure and couldn't be trusted with big decisions. At first, I brushed it off as just gossip, but then it started to seep into places I never expected. One afternoon, I got called into my firm's compliance office. The head of the department, a sharp woman named Patel, who I had worked with for years, looked at me with a mix of concern and caution. "Tyler," she said, folding her hands over a stack of reports. "We've received some inquiries, anonymous tips, questioning whether you're in a sound state to be managing client portfolios. I need to ask you directly, are you under any personal stress that could affect your performance?" The blood drained from my face. "What?" "No. My record speaks for itself." She tapped a folder on her desk. "I believe you, but perception matters in our business. Whoever is making these claims is persistent. They've sent multiple letters. I'd advise you to tread carefully, both professionally and personally." I left her office numb. I didn't need to guess who was behind it. My dad had taken his attacks beyond the family and into my career. He wasn't just trying to take the estate anymore. He was trying to strip me of everything I had built. That night, I sat alone in my apartment, lights off, staring at the city's skyline. The glow of the buildings outside usually gave me comfort, a reminder of how far I'd come since those days of scraping by in college. But now, all I felt was exhaustion. The weight of carrying not just my work, but the lies my father had wrapped around me like chains was suffocating. I stopped going to family dinners. Stopped answering calls from relatives. Even my mom's soft-voiced, "Please, Tyler, just talk to your father," felt hollow. I knew she wanted peace, but peace wasn't possible anymore. Every conversation ended with him twisting reality until I was the villain. The lowest point came when I overheard two colleagues whispering in the break room. "Isn't he the one whose own dad tried to keep him away from money?" I heard there was some incident with a trust. The other laughed. Imagine managing millions at work, but your own family doesn't trust you. I stood frozen outside the door, my stomach sinking. I had worked for years to build a reputation as sharp, reliable, steady, and in a matter of months, my father had poisoned it. For a while, I considered just walking away, letting him have the estate, the control, everything he thought he deserved. I told myself I didn't need it. I had my career, my independence. Maybe that was enough. But deep down, I knew it wasn't about the money anymore. It was about the principle. If I let him win, it would mean accepting the version of me he had crafted all my life. The weak one, the reckless one, the failure. And I couldn't let that stand. Not anymore. So, I started small, quietly. I began documenting everything, every forged paper, every rumor I could trace, every slip in his stories. I spoke to the bank manager privately, gathering statements about the attempted transfer. I even hired a handwriting expert to analyze the forged signature, just in case I needed hard proof in court. But I didn't move yet. On the surface, I stayed quiet, almost defeated, letting him think he had broken me. At family gatherings I skipped, I knew he was parading that silence as proof of my guilt. Let him. I realized the more he believed I was crushed, the less he would see what I was building underneath. Because in those quiet, sleepless nights, as I sat at my desk with documents spread out around me, I started to see the outlines of something bigger. Not just defense, but offense. A way to turn his manipulations against him, a way to make sure once and for all that when the truth came out, there would be no crawling back from it. But at that stage, I wasn't ready to act. I was still deep in the pit, carrying the weight of betrayal and humiliation. It was my rock bottom. Yet in that darkness, a small spark of something else flickered, a plan forming, sharp and patient, and my father had no idea that the son he dismissed as weak was preparing to strike back harder than he ever imagined. Rock bottom has a strange way of reshaping you. For weeks after the forgery incident, I felt hollow, like the person I'd built myself into, confident, competent, respected, had been stripped away by whispers and lies. But the thing about being at the bottom is that there's nowhere left to fall. Slowly, I realized I had two options: surrender and let my father's version of me win, or claw my way back up and build something so undeniable that even he couldn't twist it. So I started climbing. The first step was my work. I doubled down, not just to survive, but to prove to myself as much as to others that I could withstand the storm. I began staying later, working smarter, refining strategies until they sparkled. A risky investment I had been watching for months finally paid off, delivering a return that turned heads not just in my firm, but across the entire industry. Clients began to notice. Word spread. Patel, the compliance officer who had once sat me down with those skeptical questions, called me into her office again, this time with a completely different tone. "Tyler," she said, folding her hands over a stack of reports, "whatever's going on in your personal life, you've handled yourself with remarkable professionalism. The board has noticed. They want to increase your portfolio size." For a moment, I couldn't speak. "Increase?" She smiled faintly. "You'll be overseeing an additional $20 million. I walked out of that office with my chest tight, not from anxiety this time, but from a deep, steady resolve. While my father had been trying to drag me down, I was climbing higher. And the higher I climbed, the less ground his lies had to stand on. The second step was personal. I stopped isolating myself. I reached out to people who truly believed in me, mentors from college, old friends who had watched me hustle from nothing. I didn't tell them everything, but I surrounded myself with people who reminded me that I wasn't the caricature my father painted. One mentor in particular, Mr. Alvarez, a retired hedge fund manager, gave me advice over coffee one Saturday. "Your father's fighting you with shadows," he said, his weathered hands wrapped around a chipped mug. "Whispers, rumors. You can't fight shadows head-on. You shine a light so bright they can't exist." That phrase stuck with me. Shine a light. And so I began doing just that. I accepted invitations to panels and industry events I'd once avoided out of shyness. I started publishing articles in financial journals, sharing strategies that gained traction online. Slowly, my name wasn't just connected to the whispers about family drama, it was connected to expertise, innovation, results. Meanwhile, I kept building my quiet arsenal. Every false claim my father made, I tracked. Every lie, every exaggeration, I recorded. I had the bank statements proving he attempted to transfer my accounts. I had the handwriting experts report on the forgery. And when my cousin, who had initially believed my dad's rumors, overheard him bragging at a party about keeping Tyler in his place, she called me the next morning in tears. I didn't realize how far he was going, Ty. I'm sorry. I should have trusted you. I told her it was okay, but her story went straight into my growing file of evidence. By the time spring rolled around, my life looked different. I had more responsibility at work, stronger allies outside of my family, and a thicker skin than I'd ever had before. And while my dad was still whispering about me at gatherings I didn't attend, I noticed cracks forming in his control. A few relatives began reaching out quietly, asking my side of the story. One uncle even said, your father talks a lot, but I can't deny what you've accomplished. Keep at it, kid. I realized something crucial. For the first time, I wasn't just surviving my father's attacks. I was gaining ground. The man who had always cast me as weak was watching from a distance as I rose higher than he ever expected. But I didn't gloat. I didn't rub it in his face. Outwardly, I kept calm, professional, even detached. Because deep down, I knew this was only the beginning. I wasn't just rebuilding my life. I was gathering the leverage I'd need to make sure that when the time came, my father's lies wouldn't just collapse, they would collapse in a way so public, so undeniable, that there would be no recovering from it. And sure enough, the opportunity for that strike was coming. I could feel it like static in the air, the moment when everything would shift and my father would finally face the truth he had spent years trying to bury. It was almost eerie how things began to align once I stopped playing defense and started thinking several moves ahead, like a chess match where my father had been so busy mocking my pawns that he never noticed I'd been developing a queen. The turning point came when I received a call from the estate attorney, Mr. Green. He was one of those men who spoke slowly, weighing every word, with a voice that carried both authority and fatigue from decades of dealing with family disputes like mine. Tyler, he said one afternoon, I think you should know something. Your father has been pushing aggressively to alter certain aspects of the estate distribution. He insists it's in the family's best interest, but I've also seen the reports about your career, and frankly, I'm not convinced by his arguments. I leaned forward in my chair, heart pounding. What kind of changes is he trying to make? Green hesitated before answering. He wants to consolidate decision-making power into his hands. Essentially, he's lobbying to become the sole trustee of certain assets. If successful, he would have sweeping authority. And Tyler, he's been trying to discredit you to make his case stronger. There it was. Confirmation. Not just whispers, not just rumors, but hard evidence of his endgame. I thanked Green, and after the call ended, I sat in silence, staring out the window at the city lights. My father wasn't simply trying to embarrass me or tarnish my reputation. He wanted absolute control, and he was willing to destroy me to get it. But Green's call wasn't just a warning. It was a gift. Because in that moment, I realized something. The more my father pushed, the more reckless he became. He was so desperate to secure power that he wasn't careful about the trail he left behind. And trails I knew how to follow. I reached out to a contact from my industry, a journalist who specialized in finance and estate law. We had spoken casually at networking events before, but now I gave her a few carefully chosen hints. Nothing incriminating yet, just a breadcrumb trail. Families sometimes fight dirty over estates. Ever seen a case where someone forges documents? Her eyes lit up immediately. All the time. Those stories always get traction. I didn't give her mine. At least not yet. But I knew I was planting seeds. If things escalated, I had someone ready to shine a light. Meanwhile, I strengthened my position at work. Another big win with my portfolio cemented my reputation further. My name started circulating not just locally, but nationally in certain circles. A magazine even reached out for an interview about young fund managers to watch. I nearly declined. Humility had always been my shield. But then I thought of my father spinning his narrative at the dinner table, and I agreed. The feature was small, but it was public proof of my confidence. Proof no whispered rumor could erase. The real breakthrough, though, came through Matt. For all his smugness, my brother had inherited one trait from Dad: arrogance. And arrogance breeds carelessness. One night, while out for drinks with mutual acquaintances, Matt bragged about how Dad has this all wrapped up and how soon Tyler won't have a leg to stand on. What he didn't realize was that one of the people at the table was a friend of mine from college. She texted me later. He basically admitted they forged stuff. Said you'd never prove it. Thought you should know. I froze when I read it. Matt had confirmed what I suspected, out loud, to witnesses. That was more than carelessness. That was leverage. From that point on, my quiet plan gained sharper edges. I gathered my files into a single, organized binder. Bank statements, expert reports, written accounts from family members who had overheard my dad's boasts, and now a witness statement from my friend about Matt's drunken slip. Piece by piece, it was becoming undeniable. And yet, I didn't move. Not yet. I kept my composure in public. Let my father believe I was still the one cornered. Because the beauty of setups is timing. Strike too early and you tip your hand, but strike at the right moment, and everything collapses at once. The estate attorney scheduled another court session to review my father's proposed changes. I knew then that this was where it would all come to a head. He would walk in confident, armed with his usual bluster, ready to frame me as unstable. But this time, I wasn't coming in empty-handed. For the first time in years, I felt a calm resolve settle over me. I had been mocked, betrayed, dragged through the mud. But in the process, I had become sharper, stronger, harder to break. My father still thought of me as the boy he could control. What he didn't see was that I had grown into someone who could play the game better than he ever imagined. And as that court date approached, I knew one thing with absolute certainty. When the time came, I wouldn't just defend myself. I would end his narrative once and for all. The morning of the next court session, I woke up earlier than usual. The city outside my window was still quiet, the streets wet from a night rain. And for once, I didn't feel the usual storm of anxiety in my chest. There was no shaking, no second-guessing, just a steady calm, the kind that comes when you know you've prepared every last detail and all that's left is to execute. I slipped the binder of documents into my briefcase, every forgery, every statement, every proof carefully arranged in order, and headed out. On the way, I thought about my father, probably sitting smugly at his breakfast table, rehearsing the same old lines about my instability and irresponsibility. He had no idea the ground was about to give way beneath him. When I entered the courtroom, I saw him immediately. He was standing tall, shaking hands with relatives who had come to support him. Matt hovered nearby, smirking like he'd already won. My mom sat stiffly in the back, her eyes darting between us, clearly torn, but unwilling to speak against my father. I sat down calmly beside my attorney, placing the binder neatly on the table. My father noticed it and raised an eyebrow, then smirked as if to say, "You brought homework?" I didn't react. The session began, and as expected, my father launched into his performance. He painted me as unfit to handle the estate, emphasizing incidents where I had supposedly panicked, repeating the story about me trying to sign away my part of the inheritance. His lawyer backed him up, nodding gravely as if each word was undeniable truth. I stayed silent, hands folded, letting him dig deeper. Finally, the judge turned to me. "Mr. Reynolds, do you have a response?" I stood slowly, opened the binder, and slid the first document forward. "Yes, Your Honor. My father has repeatedly claimed that I attempted to relinquish my portion of the estate. Here is a copy of the document he submitted to the bank. And here, I placed another sheet beside it, and here is a forensic handwriting analysis proving the signature is forged. The signature does not match mine, but it does show patterns consistent with my father's handwriting." The courtroom rippled with whispers. My father's confident smile faltered for just a second. I turned a page. Additionally, here are statements from the bank manager confirming that my father attempted to authorize the transfer. They flagged it precisely because they suspected irregularities. More whispers. The judge leaned forward, studying the pages carefully. My father's lawyer shifted uncomfortably, flipping through his own folder as if trying to find a rebuttal that didn't exist. And I continued, my voice steady. Here is a witness statement from a relative who overheard my father bragging about keeping me in my place, and another from someone who heard my brother Matt admit that documents were forged. These are signed, dated, and notarized. At that, Matt's face drained of color. He leaned toward my father, whispering frantically, but my dad's jaw was set in stone. The judge looked up. "Mr. Reynolds, Sr., do you have an explanation for this?" My father opened his mouth, but for once, the words didn't flow. He stammered, tried to redirect, but every attempt sounded hollow against the stack of evidence laid bare on the table. The room that had once swallowed his every word now looked at him with suspicion. And that's when I delivered the final blow. I pulled out a small magazine clipping. My recent interview headlined, I announced, "Young fund manager expands portfolio to $70 million. I placed it on top of the pile. "Your Honor, my father has argued repeatedly that I am irresponsible and unfit to manage finances. Yet, I currently oversee $70 million in client assets, documented publicly. If I am trusted with that, I see no reason why I cannot be trusted with my rightful portion of my grandfather's estate." The silence that followed was electric. Relatives who had once whispered about my supposed instability now stared at me with wide eyes, as if seeing me for the first time. My mom covered her mouth, tears welling, while Matt looked like he wanted to disappear into the floor. But it was my father's face that I will never forget. That mask of control he had worn my entire life cracked wide open. His eyes narrowed, his lips twitched, and for the first time, he looked small. Not powerful, not commanding, just a man who had built his world on lies and was watching it crumble in front of everyone. The judge leaned back, folding her hands. "It appears, Mr. Reynolds, that your son is not the irresponsible party here." I sat down slowly, my hands steady on the table, my binder closed. For years, I had dreamed of a moment like this. Not out of spite, but out of the desperate need to be seen for who I really was, not who my father said I was. And now, the truth was in the open. The silence in the courtroom stretched, heavy and suffocating. My father's bluster was gone, replaced by the hollow echo of his own lies. The judge's gavel came down once, sharp and final. Given the evidence presented, it is clear that Mr. Tyler Reynolds has been the subject of deliberate attempts to discredit and defraud him. The court not only rejects the petition to strip him of his inheritance rights, but will be referring the matter of forged documents to the district attorney's office for review. The words hung in the air. My father's face turned ashen. The bravado he had worn for decades finally stripped away. His lawyer leaned in, whispering frantically, but Dad just stared at the table as if it might open and swallow him whole. Matt, for once, had no smirk, his jaw clenched, eyes darting nervously between me and the judge. He knew what was coming. If Dad went down for forgery, Matt's drunken brag would make him complicit. The judge continued, "This court finds that Mr. Tyler Reynolds is fully capable of managing his portion of the estate. Further, given his professional qualifications and the troubling actions of Mr. Reynolds, Sr., we see no reason he should not serve in a greater fiduciary role. Effective immediately, Tyler Reynolds will be named co-trustee of the estate alongside the court-appointed executive." A gasp ran through the room. My father's head snapped up, his eyes burning with disbelief. For years, he had worked to keep me in his shadow. And in the span of a few minutes, he had not only lost control, but watched it handed directly to me. I didn't gloat. I didn't smile. I simply nodded, thanked the judge, and closed my binder. As court adjourned, my father tried one last desperate play. He grabbed my arm in the hallway, his grip surprisingly weak. "Tyler, listen to me. We don't have to do this. We're family. We can fix this before it gets worse." I looked at him. Really looked at him for the first time in years. Not as the looming figure who had defined my childhood, but as a man who had gambled everything on control and lost. "No," I said quietly. "You taught me my whole life that I wasn't enough, that I was weak. But today, you proved something. The only weakness in this family is your inability to let go of power. That's not my burden to carry anymore. It's yours." I walked away, leaving him standing there, stunned. In the weeks that followed, the fallout was swift. The district attorney opened an investigation into the forgery. Whispers that once tore down my reputation now swirled around my father instead. Relatives who had avoided me began calling, apologizing, trying to reconcile. My mom visited me one evening, tears streaming down her face. "I should have stood up sooner," she whispered. I hugged her, but I didn't offer false comfort. Some wounds take time to heal. Matt, stripped of Dad's protection, floundered. His career, always buoyed by family connections, began to crumble as people distanced themselves from the scandal. He sent me a text once. I didn't think it would go this far. I didn't reply. At work, my name carried even more weight now. Not because of the estate, but because I had weathered the storm without breaking. Patel stopped me in the hallway one morning and said, "I don't know the details of what happened, Tyler, but whatever it was, you handled it better than most people could." That kind of resilience is rare. And she was right. The storm hadn't broken me. It had forged me. Months later, when the estate was finally settled, I visited my grandfather's old house, now officially under my care. I walked through the quiet rooms, remembering his voice. Don't let anyone convince you that seeing things differently is a weakness. I stood by the window, looking out over the garden, and felt the weight of it all lift. My father had tried to chain me to his vision of who I was. Instead, he had set the stage for me to prove who I really was. Not just to him, but to everyone, including myself. And as I closed the door behind me that evening, I realized something. Revenge hadn't been about humiliating him. It had been about reclaiming myself. My father lost everything he had tried to hold on to. I didn't need to take it from him. He destroyed it with his own hands. And me? I walked away with more than money or power. I walked away free.